Are you looking to become a Tier 1 operator in the gaming world? Elevate your games with Black Site Studio Terrain.
Okay, everyone, looks like we are live. And welcome, everybody. All right, looks like we got a little bit of a crowd here today. Because Science Teacher, welcome to the stream. LSR, all the way from Australia. Hello, how you doing? Novus Templar, hey, what's going on? From Kansas. Mac Goth Mog. I may not be saying that right. Mac Goth Mog. Hopefully, I'm saying that right, Mac. I'm just going to call you Mac. Is that cool? If not, I apologize. Okay, guys. As you can probably tell by now, um, I'm running the stream tonight. This is going to be a short one, and it's going to be a little subdued. We are here in Central and South Florida, looking down both barrels of a Category 4 hurricane as we speak, and it's that's all good, cool. So yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty in the air right now. There's a lot going on. Um, so we are still going to try and fill this slot here on our Thursday night as usual for Sit Rep Podcast, and then there's a lot going on. So I hope that you guys will bear with me. I will definitely not be streaming on Sunday. I do not know if we will have somebody else covering on Sunday, but I will definitely not be covering my normal Sunday. So apologize in advance for that. Our friend, Mr. Dorian, as in Hurricane Dorian, has other ideas for my weekend. We're going to be doing the post-apocalyptic scale, or the post-apocalyptic genre at 1-to-1 scale for about the next week. Is the long and short of that one. But enough of that. For now, we're going to have some fictitious destruction here with a quick look at Panzer Leader. So let me get a full screen going. Alrighty. Yeah, we're going to get more than a day off. We're going to get about a week off. You can't create content without internet, and you can't create content without electricity. And we're going to have neither for quite a while. We go through a big hurricane about every 2 years, so it's not that big a deal. No one's in any kind of physical danger. I don't want to over dramatize it or anything, but it is going to be a huge pain in the ass for at least a week. Um, Between power grid being completely shut off, nobody can buy gas, nobody has credit cards, nobody has cell phones, nobody has. I mean, we're going to be back in the 1970s for a while, so it's going to be. Yeah, it is boring. Boring is the worst part of it. Boring and hot. So anyway, enough about that. So what was requested for today is to take a quick look at how some Panzer Leader is played. Okay, so because Panzer Leader is becoming, I still can't believe I'm saying this. Panzer Leader is becoming something of a semi popular. I don't want to say popular, but something of a staple here on SitRep because you can play Panzer into the modern era. And we're also looking at maybe doing some Panzer in 1944 for some upcoming Operation Market Garden September 1944 75th anniversary commemorative games. We have been doing Panzer in 1939 with my friend Piotr for a lot of 1939 Poland games. We're doing the 80th anniversary of the start of World War II. So Panzer has been making a bit of an appearance on SitRep, and the idea was to actually take a couple turns, explain the rules, talk about how the game works at a high level. I mean, it's a pretty chunky game, but just so maybe so that we can get some more people who are interested in it can play with us live on the weekends like we do all the time. LSR can tell you about that. I think Novus Templar has also logged in and been a spectator in a couple of our games. We have Dylan, we have Damon, we have all kinds of people who try this stuff out. Gianna has tinkered around with it before. We've had Rasmus. We've had a couple people with other games. We've been doing a lot of web gaming. A lot of it has been in Panzer and so we wanted to take a quick look at how Panzer actually works. Maybe the audience could become a little bit more engaged if they knew how the game really worked at its fundamental levels. All right, so we have a very, very small, very simple Panzer straight out 1944 game here set up. You'll notice the historical locations I have set up here of West Town, West Village, North Manor, East Town, North Village. Do I have two North Villages? No, I don't. North Village, South Village. Okay, clearly this is like a standard stock template kind of a map where we are. We're gonna push around a few counters here and show quickly how the game works. So let me quickly open up Mr. Webcam here. Alrighty. Okay, so Panzer is the Avalon Hill Classic. Okay, this, oh God, where do I start? Panzer was designed by a man by the name of Jim Dunnigan. Every time people start crowing about people like Rick Priestley, I want to scream Jim Dunnigan in their face. Jim Dunnigan used to work at Avalon Hill. He started off in the early 60s. He designed like the first Waterloo game. He designed all kinds of stuff. He eventually got into more modular, like command tactical games, the kind of games that we buy on the market now. This is back in the late 60s before people made games like this. Panzer Blitz was the first. It actually started off as like Tactical Game 3, then became Highway 69, then became State Farm something or other. Like the absolute basic of the basic, cut out your counters in construction paper kind of stuff. It was published in a serialized form in the General Magazine. That's a magazine back before the internet. They had this weird thing called magazines. They would publish it in the General Magazine that Avalon Hill used to publish, and that went on for a while. Finally, the game caught enough of an attention where they published Panzer Blitz in 1970. Then we went into Panzer Leader. Okay, Panzer Blitz is like the first edition of the game. That's published in 1970. That handles the Eastern Front. It's all Germans versus Soviets in 1940. It says 41 to 45, but it's really 43 to 45. It had at the time. This is like the Model T of modular command tactical war games. It had at the time the earth-shattering innovations of a couple of geomorphic map boards and a whole bunch of counters and like I think it had 12 scenario cards that you could play. All this stuff sounds very, very basic now. This is 1970, 1969, 1970. This is one of the first games to actually do that. Almost every game that you buy, computer, miniature, hex encounter, anything that comes with here's a bunch of pieces, here's some basic map boards, and here's some scenarios that you can try, does draw a line of sight back to games like Panzer and does owe a certain degree of does owe something to that pedigree. The game is tragically flawed. Like I said, it's the Model T of this kind of gaming. Model T is not a very fast car. It's not very mechanically reliable. I would still prefer a Saturn to a modern T to a Model T. It's not going to outrun a Ferrari. It's not going to outpull a Ford Explorer. It's a Model T. So almost immediately people started to improve upon it. Panzer Leader came out in 1974. Panzer Leader was like the fans were screaming for Panzer Leader by 1974. Because they're like, we're tired of playing Russians and Germans. We want to play our people. We want to play British and Americans and Germans. We want to do D-Day, Battle of the Bulge. We want to do Market Garden. We want to do, all this stuff. So Avalon Hill said, fine, we'll come up with Panzer Leader. Panzer Leader is 1944 and 45, Western Front, and that's this game right here. That's basically second edition. Fixes some of the problems, not all of the problems. What was I going to say? Let me get a little bit of extra light in here. Oof, it's almost too bright. The artillery system is still tragically broken. But they did fix some of the original terrain problems and a few other things. Finally came Arab-Israeli Wars. Arab-Israeli Wars came out in 1977. This is when the Yom Kippur War was only 4 years old. So it's not exactly accurate historically, but most of the information was still classified. Arab-Israeli Wars was basically the third edition. It brought in a whole bunch of stuff, finally fixed the artillery system, finally fixed overruns, fixed cat attacks, fixed all this stuff. And what it basically comes down to is people who play Panzer Leader to this day, and the reason I bring all this stuff up is because we're about to go into some of the rules, and some of the rules I'm going to explain to you are not from technically Panzer Leader. Most people who play Panzer Leader nowadays, and there are people who still play it at conventions, there are still people who have clubs for it, there are still people who do this stuff online, obviously. Board Game Geek is awash with this stuff. What they're really doing, whether they know it or not, whether they realize it or not, whether they want to admit it or not, is they're playing Arab-Israeli Wars retrofitted back into the Panzer Leader setting. So, so to speak. So, I'm not going to get too into the Arab-Israeli War rules because that stuff gets a little bit more complicated. Again, we're trying to do a basic kind of a level set on Panzer Leader. But Gianna asked me to pretty much come up with a quick stream to go through the basics of Panzer Leader and how a stream actually works. So again, here is a basic map of Panzer Leader. So, in case people haven't heard me, I'll go through this super fast. Panzer Leader is what we call a platoon-based game. It's not a platoon-level game, it's a platoon-based game. So, I would say, and again, people might have different views or different definitions. Say Bolt Action is a platoon-level game. You put an army on the table, that's roughly a platoon, so to speak. Platoon is anywhere between 30 and 50 men. That's usually what you have in a decent-sized game of Bolt Action. That's supposed to be a platoon-level game. When I say Panzer Leader is a platoon-based game, every piece on the map is a full platoon. So this right here, where did I put that piece that I just zoomed in on? This right here is 3 Bolt Action armies. 3 armies of U.S. Army 1944 Airborne, specifically paratroopers. There's about 160, 200 men in that stack of 3. Each counter in that stack being a platoon of 40 to 50 men. Each piece of tanks represents a platoon of 5, is usual. Sometimes there's a platoon of 4 and they'll have slightly reduced values. Sometimes the Soviets will deploy in half companies of 5. It's long, to put it in summary, it's between 4 and 5 tanks. So let's just call it a platoon or a large troop. Okay, here are the numbers on the counter. I'll zoom in super hard so we can see the counters extra big. Okay. Panzer Leader comes down to basically 4 numbers and a letter. 4 numbers and a letter. So, the first number, here at upper left, is the attack. It's an 11. When this Sherman platoon of 5 tanks fires, she throws out 11 points worth of firepower. The A stands for armor piercing. That's the weapons class, and we'll get into all the different weapons classes in a little bit. So it's not just a number, it's the way that number behaves vis-a-vis other kinds of targets, armored, non-armored, certain ranges, certain conditions, things like that. But we'll get into that in a little bit. 8 is the range. It can shoot 8 hexes. In formal Panzer Leader, a hex is 250 meters. Yes, that gives this Sherman a range of 2 kilometers. That's just absurd. That's one of the many things that Arab Israeli Wars fixes, and we'll get into that later. But for now, we're just going to stick with Panzer Leader. 9 is the defense. So when enemy shells hit this platoon of Panthers, when Panthers shoot at these Shermans, resist with an armor rating basically of 9. Now, I say armor rating, but that's wrong. It's the name of the value is defense. And that defense value is a combination of how thick the armor is, how well it is sloped and whatever, how small the unit is. So that same thickness of armor, say in a Grant, I think a Grant has an 8 because it's 14 feet high. Weapons or vehicles or units that are difficult to hide get a lower defense value, even if they're bigger, even if they're more thickly armored. This is how hard that unit is to destroy, is abstracted into an overall defense value. And 8 is its movement. That's how many hexes it can move during its turn. In summary, again, that's the super fast kind of summary there. So Panzer Leader gives you literally a huge box of counters. Those of you who have Panzer Leader pieces or whatever, you'll see that there is all kinds of, just on this map, I have, for the Germans, I have rifles, I have engineers, I have Panzerschrecks, I have half-track 80, I'm half-track anti-aircraft guns, regular half-tracks, Panthers, Mark IVs, Stugs, trucks, quad barrel 20 millimeters, command posts, security platoons, 81 millimeter mortars, more trucks, more quad barrel 20 millimeters, more rifles, more HMGs, one battery of 88s. Then if you get down here to these black counters, you'll see I have one Kampfgruppe of SS. Waffen SS I have built just for fun. Because who doesn't like blowing up the SS, right? So yeah, we have some SS troops in here. The Americans have, just for fun, I threw in airborne, some paratroopers, specifically 508th Company of the 82nd. That's airborne, machine guns platoon, or a machine gun section. I have some engineers. I'll have to stick on a hex somewhere. Airborne machine guns, headquarters. You guys see all the counters. Again, each one of these counters is roughly a platoon of between 40 and 50 men. The Shermans are about 5 Shermans apiece, so there's 15 Shermans there. More Shermans. Then I have some Easy 8s. This was the American attempt to come up with something like the Firefly. It didn't really work. I mean, it was better than the regular Sherman. It wasn't bad. It had some advantages over the Firefly, but overall, I think the Firefly was still a better tank. I am sorry to admit. We do have what was called an Angel of Death. This was the Sherman that does not carry an anti-tank gun at all, but a 105 millimeter assault howitzer. Hence, it has the H assault factor instead of the A. We'll get to that in a little bit. And then finally, we have the M7 Priest. M7 Priest, if I can get my OBS out of the way, M7 Priest is 105 millimeter artillery piece bolted into a former, I think it was either a Sherman or a Grant chassis. I'm sure there were different kinds. The M7 Priest was a very, very useful piece of equipment. Self-propelled artillery that was armored, so you could get it right up to the front. And it still usually fired indirectly, but it could resist counter battery fire. It could resist shell splinters. Completely open top. It wasn't like a tank by any means, hence the rather low defense factor of only 7. But very useful piece of equipment. Okay, so in Panzer Leader, there is no point system. First of all, let me catch up on the chat and let me see what we got going on here. Oh man, we got quite a bit going on here. All right. Novus Templar wants to sit in the back and out distract the other players. Ah, no, it's cool. It's all good. You can always yell in there and give them ideas because sometimes they're like, "Oh, I'm not sure what to do." Cool. Thanks very much for stopping by, Sit Rep Podcast. Good old Avalon Hill, right? No blue versus pink. Funny you should say that because Science said, yeah, Avalon Hill publishing back in the 60s and 70s, it was a lot of blue versus pink because that was the only colors they had. Um, the counters were definitely were definitely a little rough, and I'll show you just how rough in just a little bit. You like big hexes and you cannot lie? Okay, cool. Because movies got all the jokes today. Fun fact: to test the ability of the tank to resist the recoil, this is LSR 2590. To test the ability of the tank to resist the recoil of a 17 pounder, they strapped two 25s, fired them simultaneously. Yeah, cool. I did not know that. I do know that they had to turn the gun sideways to fit it into the turret. And the other thing that really kind of craps out on the Firefly in Panzer Leader, and why a lot of people in the UK don't like Panzer Leader, is Panzer Leader pays attention to history. And what Panzer Leader will do is, number one, it organizes the British into four tank troops instead of five tank platoons. So right off the bat, a similar unit of British forces will be a little bit weaker, quote unquote, um, than its American counterpart, and people immediately sort of take that as a slight, as whatever, as far as like the efficiency of the British tank crews or their courage or God knows what. No, it's just that piece represents four tanks instead of five, is all. And then they have the Firefly, and the Firefly is even worse. And they're like, "What's going on with this Firefly?" And then of course they have the Easy 8 with a full barrel, 14 attack factor. And they're like, "Oh, this game was published by Americans. Look what they're doing. They're making their own tanks, uncharacteristically better than the British Firefly." When in fact the opposite was probably the case. No, it's one Firefly and three Shermans in a four tank troop. So it gets watered down, and you actually break down the numbers and you run the averages back forward and you come up with the exact right number that they print on the counter. Whereas a troop, or it's not a troop, I'm sorry, that's the whole point. It's a platoon. The Americans organize in five tank platoons. That is a platoon of five Easy 8s, as opposed to one Firefly and three Vanilla Shermans. But we're getting way off topic. The point of the story is that these guys really did pay very close attention to their number. There's tons of designers' notes put out there as far as how they arrived at their numbers, what the numbers mean, and how they are meant to plug into the game. Okay, so it was the M. Lee Grant. I couldn't know if it was the Grant or the. I think some later ones they had to use the Sherman. And by the way, the Grant and the Sherman have very, very similar chassis. In fact, almost identical chassis. Identical up until you get to how the hull was actually constructed. Some of them were cast, some of them were riveted, some of them were welded, and so you have some differences there. But if you look at the wheels, fun fact: if you ever want to like really be a grognard and like shoot holes in a movie, and you see a tank in a movie, look at the wheels and look at the tracks. That's the one part of the tank they can't fake. That's where the DNA of the tank really is. It's in the suspension, the bogies, the road wheels, and the tracks. Look down there. That's the one thing they can't really change. And that's where you're going to see the real DNA, so to speak, of the tank. That's where you're going to see, if you look at just that, you'll see how the M3 Grant and the M3 Lee, well, first of all, those are already the same basic tank, different turrets. And then you're going to see where, yeah, that looks a lot like a Sherman. Yeah, that looks a lot like a Grant. Yeah, that looks a lot like a Kangaroo. Yeah, that looks a lot like a Firefly. Yeah, they're all basically the same vehicle. I stress basically. But you guys can ask other people about that. Okay, so Panzer Leader is played in turns. First of all, there's no point system in Panzer Leader. This game transcends point values. As soon as Panzer Leader was published in the mid 1970s, people in the general magazine and also just desktop publishing and whatever back before the internet were trying to come up with a point system to fit into Panzer Leader. They have been trying for 40 years. I'm not kidding. They have yet to do it correctly. They can't. It's an impossible task. The reason is because this Panther is going to be an absolute monster in some battles and a white elephant in other battles. You put this thing in a street fight, and it's going to be the biggest liability you've ever had. You put it on the Russian steppe against a company of T-34s, and it's going to be worth its weight in gold, or some variation therein. Who knows how good that? The idea of putting some sort of a point value on a tank or on a tank platoon or on any of these unit platoons has never worked, and it never will, because the game is. I mean, it's not going to settle for that. I've been playing Panzer Leader for 20 years, 30 years, off and on. Eventually you get to the point where you just get good at it, and you can create scenarios actually pretty well. Well, I got Paras on the board right here. And as far as it's not all about tanks, because SitRep, if you check out our two recent podcasts, or not podcasts, our two recent games we've had in Poland, the tanks have been absolutely clobbered. What has won the battle in both of those games has been artillery, and yeah, you guessed it, infantry. Panzer Leader, despite the name, is a game that really forces you into the true scope of combined arms warfare. And what you're going to do is you're going to learn very, very quickly that in a lot of scenarios, tanks are worthless. Tanks are a huge liability, and you're going to find that some kinds of tanks are a lot more useful in some situations. Then again, the next battle it'll be totally different. But you're absolutely right. It's not just about tanks. The game's name, Panzer Leader, is a little misleading that way. So just to get a quick look at how Panzer Leader used to look, if you actually buy Panzer Leader on eBay, this is what you're going to get. This is what a Panzer Leader board actually looks like. You get 4 of these in the map board. This is 2 joined end to end here. You'll notice that no matter which way you put the boards, the streams and the roads and the tree hexes will always line up. This was a really big deal back in the early 70s. They called it geomorphic map boards. And what the innovation was, again, this is all 40 years ago, was they would send you 4 of these in the box, and you could put them together literally dozens of ways. The box claims hundreds. I've never tried hundreds. But the game said, because again, you would get 4 of these, not just 2. And you'd be able to put them, and so you'd have like not infinite, but a large number of potential battlefields by just sticking the boards together in different shapes and configurations. And they're drawn in such a way where no matter how you put them together, the roads and the streams will always line up. Then you would play a scenario. They had a bunch of scenarios that came in on these little cards called scenario cards. Take a look at the printing. Again, this is circa 1974, so it goes back a ways. This is all we had back in the day. But the research was there, the rules were there, the rules worked. What rules didn't work have since been refined, not only in Arab-Israeli Wars, basically 3rd edition Panzer Leader, but also, the ongoing tabletop community that has persisted since the game went out of print, I think in 1982. The Panzer Leader system, the example I always use, it's almost like I'll say this one more time, the Battle Fleet Gothic of, in 40K. So GW put that game down, God knows when, back in the 80s somewhere, and somehow or another that game persists because the community picked it up, continues to desktop publish stuff for it, continues to come up with new modules, new updates, new scenarios, new expansions, and that game is still going strong even though the company hasn't touched it in 35 years. Panzer Leader is pretty much the same way. Panzer Leader was eventually sold to, I think, a company called Multiman Publishing, which tried something called Panzer Hill of Death. Absolutely not recommended. It is a obscene blasphemy on the original Panzer system. It ignores all of the, or I should say, it ignores a lot of. It ignores a lot of the improvements that they made in Arab-Israeli wars. They went right back to Panzer which was admittedly broken in a few places, and they doubled down on some of the mistakes. They have some interesting scenarios in there. It's not completely worthless, but not my jam. And at least for my personal opinion, which is only a personal opinion, not really recommended. So, needless to say, in the wonderful world of Photoshop and desktop publishing, this is what our counters and boards look like now. We've come a long way, baby. So, we're just going to go over like a turn or two. Oh, excuse me. We're just going to go over a turn or two and show how this game kind of works. So, the what was I going to say here? A turn of Panzer is broken down into a series of segments, like most games, and like most good games, the secret sauce of how the game works, whether or not it's a good game or a bad game, is hidden in the turn sequence. So, at least it's my opinion. I've designed plenty of games. I designed Dark Star. I designed a bunch of other games. Expansions for Valor and Victory, Star Wars Pocket Models. That's just the stuff I publish on Beasts of War. There's a lot of stuff I've worked on over the years. It's just been my experience that you can tell if a game is good or not by the turn sequence. And if you pay attention to a well-designed turn sequence and you stick to it, the game will deliver good results. So, in very summary terms, the turn sequence for a game of Panzer starts with... Maybe I should type this out. So, hold on, everybody, 2 seconds. I probably should have had this prepared ahead of time. Okay. There we go. Okay. Turn sequence, step 1. Or, what's the best word for this? Plot indirect fire. So, Panzer has indirect fire. Mortars, howitzers, to include but not limited to off-board mortars, off-board howitzers, in some scenarios, off-board warships. The big Normandy games, you'll have battleships off the table. If you don't believe me, ask Damon, ask Bruce Lee. They had HMS Warspite in their order of battle, and they had a lot of fun with that. However, the trick is you have to call that in. And it's not like most games where it's like, oh, here's my unit. This unit has a line of sight on that unit. I'm going to call an indirect fire on it. No, this unit has indirect fire on that unit. Now guess what you get to do? You get to call in that hex number a turn in advance and hope that other guy doesn't move. Or if you think he's going to head south into this gully, for some reason this gully hex is really important, 1525, you would say, I'm going to call in artillery on 1525. You write that down in secret, and you kind of slip it under the corner of the table or whatever, and then you reveal that in the next turn, and you hope to God that you call it in the right place. In this past weekend's game of Poland, Panzer 1939, sometimes you get kind of screwed up. Poor Piotr, that's Yavasa on tabletop, called in artillery on himself because he called in artillery and then forgot it, and then he moved some units into that hex, and then came time to reveal it. He revealed his worst artillery mission that we're going. He just pulled a broken arrow on himself. He's calling in artillery on himself. Don't laugh, I've done that. I've done that in GDW Assault. I called in an artillery-delivered minefield on myself. It can totally happen. For various reasons. Artillery can drift and can land in the wrong place. And anyway, you have to call it in a turn in advance, and you have to really plan ahead. And that's the first phase of the game. Number 2. You resolve last turn's artillery. This is important, folks, because when you have to plot your next turn's so say you're on turn 3, you have to plot the artillery that you want to land on turn 4 before you resolve the artillery that you called in on turn 2. So the fire mission that you called in on turn 2, the beginning of turn 2, that's now going to land at the beginning of your turn 3, you don't know how effective that is or is not going to be. Do you call in turn 4's artillery on that same hex just to be sure? Or do you reassign that artillery somewhere else to maximize its effect? You don't know. You have to plan, and you have to take chances. You have to have contingencies. Your plan has to have flexibility. Panzer Leader is not a game that holds your hand. This is not an easy game. This game will punish the weak. You have to have. You don't have to be a tactical genius. You really don't. You have to be able to set up a plan, and then that plan has to be a little simple because it has to be flexible. And then you have to execute against that plan. You have to plan in broad strokes and then execute in minute detail, exacting detail, just like a real military operation. Your military operation cannot be planned in exacting detail because no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Warfare is the realm of organized chaos. We all know all the cliches. Okay, the basic idea is war shit goes sideways. Okay, so your plan can't be that complicated, but you do have to have a plan, and then you have to execute against it in tactical detail. So once you call in next turn's artillery, then you resolve the artillery you called in last turn that hits this turn. You watch a bunch of big explosions. Hopefully they're not on your own guys. Half as many times as not, you just flat out miss. And even when you do hit, it doesn't do enough damage, but whatever. You call in your artillery and it splashes. Okay, then you finally get to where you're blowing stuff up the old-fashioned way, direct fire. So all units that have line of sight and are in range of enemies can fire if they want. The age-old maxim of if you have a shot, take it, that is absolutely not true in Panzer Leader, at least not in all cases. You absolutely cannot always do that, because if you do, you give away your position. The enemy, there's going to be a lot of games and a lot of particular situations where when you take a shot, you give away your position. That's the last thing you want to do. However, you're allowed to, and that's if you have line of sight, if you have line of fire. Those two things are not the same. And if you have, if you're in range. It's sort of part of the direct fire phase is after that you do rallies. So units can become what they call dispersed in Panzer Leader. Dispersed is basically pinned in other games. If you know what pinned is, you know what dispersed is. The unit is damaged, shot up, pinned down, scared, smoking, whatever. It doesn't matter. The unit can't move or fire and is much more vulnerable to being destroyed until it rallies and kind of pulls itself back together. Remember, everything in here is a platoon. Every hex is 250 meters of terrain. So every hex is like 8 feet on a Flames of War table. Every single hex on this map, and this is a small map, is an 8x4 Flames of War table. So when a unit gets dispersed, i.e. pinned, what it has to do is pull itself back together. These troops are scattered, like these engineers, for example, we say they're dispersed. They're scattered to hell and gone right now. They're trying to take cover. The troops are under trees and foxholes, trying to crawl up their own third point of contact, just wishing they were anywhere but here. Okay, that's all fine, but sooner or later, the corporals, sergeants, staff NCOs, and lieutenants have to pull that platoon back together. That's the rally phase. Now, there's different ways you can rally, depending on what edition of the game you're playing, but either way, it happens here. Number 4, movement. This is a big one. Most good games are won or lost not in the shooting phase, but in the movement phase. Almost all good war games, I feel, are 90% movement, 10% combat. Panzer Leader also has the little caveat where if your unit fires, that was his turn. If your unit rallies, that was his turn. He's not moving. This is a game where you have to choose, in a lot of cases, Whether or not you move or fire, almost never can you do both. There are exceptions to that. But most of the time, the general rule is if you fire, you don't move, and if you move, you don't fire. Panzer Leader tries to look at combat in the slightly more realistic way, whereas if you look at most good war movies or most good documentaries, when people are really putting down fire, that tank, that infantry squad, that artillery battery is sitting still. And it's just putting down fire. When he's running, he's running. He's not firing and moving. These are pre-stabilized guns. There's no ballistic fire control computers in these turrets. You are either moving or firing. You're not doing both. Panzer Leader is the kind of game where you will do most of your movement in your turn and most of your actual shooting in the enemy's turn. Which brings up the next point. Oops. 4A, indirect fire. I'm sorry, opportunity fire. Opportunity fire is what I like to call, oh, you think you invented that? Opportunity fire is what some games like to call reaction fire, some games like to call ambush fire, some games like to call an ARO, and they talk about it like it's always your turn. This is our big innovation. Panzer Leader was doing this in 1974. Panzer Blitz was doing this in 1969, so you didn't invent it. Opportunity fire is something that's going to sound very familiar to most wargamers. Pretty much you shoot at the enemy while he's moving. You can pause his movement, take a shot at him, and then he has to suffer the effects of your fire while he's moving. The trade-off is that was your fire phase for your next turn. When you use opportunity fire, the expression I use is you are borrowing against your next fire phase. So when your next fire phase comes along, you don't get to move or fire. You've taken your turn early. But what this allows you to do is allows you to set up good fields of fire, under cover, and if the enemy decides to move in front of you or charge against you, like most good, realistic military situations, you will get a shot at them if you want. Again, sometimes you won't want to. There's somebody else you want to shoot at. You don't want to give away your position. There's reasons. Firing is never free. When you fire, you give away your position, and when you fire, you don't get to fire later on in the turn. You probably don't get to move later on in the turn. So this is not a game, again, where you always take a shot if you have a free shot, because there's no such thing as a free shot in Panzer Leader. Opportunity fire, like I said, that's movement. During movement, you can do what's called an overrun phase. Certain kinds of units can do an overrun. An overrun is any kind of armored vehicle. You can only overrun enemy armored vehicles if you're an armored vehicle yourself and you have an A-class weapon. In other words, an armor-piercing weapon. An overrun is literally you are blasting your. It's the last 10 minutes of Saving Private Ryan. You drive your Tigers into the enemy position and you are literally overrunning the guns, overrunning the infantry. The problem is the infantry or whoever it is you're overrunning gets to attack you while you're doing the overrun. We sometimes jokingly call it the sticky bomb phase. And that's where, you really want to use some good tactics. Again, Panzer Leader rewards good tactics and even more so punishes bad tactics. Panzer Leader is a game that will punish you. If you are thin-skinned and you're not very, if you're susceptible to not feeling very good about yourself, Panzer Leader may not be the game for you. I'm not trying to scare anybody. It's a most rewarding game you'll have once you get it right. I have photographic evidence of that. I'll get to that at the end of the turn. Someone remind me to talk about that later, of how rewarding Panzer Leader can be and my photographic evidence of that. I have empirical proof of that. Okay. After overruns, the last thing that takes place in a movement phase is technically what they call a cat attack. Or really, close assault tactics. That's where the word cat comes from. Close assault tactics is basically overruns for infantry. You close assault an enemy. Your infantry unit charges into the enemy position if you're close enough. Again, these are 150, usually 250 meter hexes. You have to be really close. You charge into the enemy position with grenades, e-tools, bayonets, and it's now a fist fight with grenades, and you're really up there in the enemy's teeth. Very risky, very bloody, incredibly effective. incredibly effective. Okay, let me check the stream here. Thinking ahead, gasp, that really sucks. Well, because science teacher, you do it all the time in Darkstar, so you don't get to complain too much. Thinking ahead is great in game, says LSR 2590. Wings of Glory makes you plan 3 turns ahead, which is very tricky. Um, Panzer will make you if you have any artillery on the board, you are playing 3 turns at once. You are playing last turn, this turn, and next turn. Um, and what I feel, again, just personal opinion. Spoiler alert: this is one of my favorite games ever. What makes it, I feel like that kind of, it's almost like glue. So if you're building a model and if your game lasts 10 turns, say you're building a model and your model has 10 pieces, this is literally like the wash that you put on your model. It gets into all the cracks, it gets between the different colors of your model, and it pulls your whole model together. I know that's kind of a weird analogy, but it literally makes any 3 turns of your game kind of gel into one decision cycle. So you have one decision cycle that begins on turn 1, goes to turn 2, and ends on turn 3. Then you have another decision cycle that begins on turn 2, begins on turn 3, ends on turn 4. Then 3, 4, 5. Then 4, 5, 6. You guys see what I'm getting at? Pretty soon you get like this interwoven, interleaved sort of a stack, almost like shingles on a roof, where the whole game just kind of blends together into where you have had one cohesive battle, especially if you pull it off. And it's a really fun experience, I feel. It is challenging. It does not go gently into that good night. It will not lay down for you. This is a game that will punish you for, oops, speaking of mistakes, will punish you for making mistakes, but reward you for doing, you don't even have to be like, again, super brilliant, but just doing things right. Coming up with a simple plan and executing it correctly. You get one plan in Panzer Leader. That's not a rule, that's just a general tendency. And I did forget one thing. I won't renumber all these turns. Well, maybe I will. There is an air phase in here. Air phase is right after you do artillery, before you do direct fire. I did skip it because sometimes you don't, in fact, in most games, you don't have air power. Air power is more of an exception than a rule. So sometimes you don't get air phase. But if you do get an air phase, that's where it comes in. As you bring in your aircraft, the enemy does probably have, you guessed it, anti-aircraft fire. Okay. So those are the basic the basic steps that are in a Panzer Leader game turn. Then the enemy does the same thing. Because there's anti-aircraft fire, because there's opportunity fire, because you're resisting overruns, this is a game where it is always kind of your turn. It is a you go, I go game, to be 100% honest. However, it's not a game where you can like log onto your phone and play Candy Crush or whatever while your enemy's making his turn. I guess there are some turns that you can do that, but do so at your peril, because if the enemy just rolls right up on you with a battalion of Tigers, right past your anti-tank guns, your 17-pounders, and you look at him saying, "Why didn't I get to take opportunity fire?" And you say, "Well, I was playing Candy Crush," when you should have been watching the board. Well, I don't know what to tell you at that point. Oh, excuse me. Okay, I think I may have lost some of the stream here. Okay. I should get out my Armada stuff out for another game. I kept buying the new massive Imperial ships. Oh, cool. That's for Star Wars Armada, right? Are you going to, LSR 2590, are you going to do that one on your channel? Review it? I was looking at your Imperial Assault review. SitRep podcast, that would be cool. I'm not sure what we're referring to. We might have been talking about the battleship that far back. Sorry. More Imperial talk. Counterattack and sea hexes. Yeah, that's a famous rule in the Normandy scenarios for Panzer Leader. You're not allowed to close assault. No bayonet charges in the surf. I don't know why. Marines do it all the time. Oh, cool. Thank you, Novus Templar. You know, Novus Templar, every once in a while, it's cool when somebody goes to look up the record and proves you right. Usually it's the other way. Somebody goes to Wikipedia or somebody goes to some other online reference. They go to imright.com and they say, "Excuse me, sir, I think what you meant to say is." So, hey, thanks very much. The M68, was that a 67B? M7B1, sorry. Yeah, I was pretty sure because there's a bunch of different versions of the Sherman. There's going to be a bunch of Sherman versions of the Priest as well. Oh no! Oh god, yeah, it's fun. Yeah, well, so because science teacher is talking about the LSR 2590 is we had an old World of Darkness role playing game that got so big and our characters got so powerful that before we knew it, we each had like our own little private personal armies. And like we completely broke the actual combat resolution system for any kind of action scenes in the story, and we basically turned it into a skirmish war game. And we tried to use a Panzer leader type system. I didn't have Valorant Victory at the time. I should have used Valorant Victory, but I didn't know about it yet. This is like 10, 15 years ago, back when I used to play role playing games. And it got to the point where we were really playing war games most of the time. It's like D&D, you know, once your character gets up to 20th, 25th, 30th, 35th, 40th, 50th level, are you really going down into caves and fighting bats and kobolds anymore? No, you have a castle, you have an army, and you're probably playing Kings of War at that point. You know, that's what you're doing. You're not, all fighting, individual wandering monsters in a cave somewhere. So we tried to do something generally to that, and believe it or not, yes, we had cat attacks in sea hexes, but that's way off topic. Okay, so before the stream gets completely off the whack here, those were fun games. We had these weird kind of like they're like werewolves, but instead of wolves, they were crocodiles. They were like were crocodiles, if that makes any sense. And they actually got overrun by enemy speedboats. He got a little silly, just a little silly. And it was just funny because we always laugh about that rule in Panzer Leader. It's like, really, they had to write that rule in there? You're not allowed to drive your tank and overrun people in an ocean hex? Well, it just happened in an ocean hex. Never say never. Okay, so now that we've kind of looked at the overall turn sequence, we're going to go through the motions of like one turn here just to show people kind of how it goes. So I will put some of these enemy units a little closer together. Let's see, let's make it the Americans' turn. And let's say that they're trying to take this little hill here. So let's pretend just for a minute that that's an objective hex. You guys see that little yellow asterisk there? Or that little yellow targeting symbol there? Let's just pretend that that's a objective hex, and the Americans are trying to get to that objective hex. Never defend ground with tanks. Always put infantry on ground you want to hold. Tanks for attack, infantry for defense. Artillery supports everyone. The laws of war as written by Oriskany. Except I'm just plagiarizing from other people. Those certainly aren't my rules. Okay, just for fun, come on, keep scrolling. That's all the tanks I gave? Let's have fun. Boom, the Americans get another company of tanks. Bam. Okay. So we have in a completely fictional battle that never took place. We have some tanks, Combat Command A, 1st Armored Division, and again, 1st Battalion, 508th, 82nd Airborne. The reason I put 82nd Airborne in here, especially the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment, is I have a sneaking suspicion. I cannot confirm or deny this. I have a sneaking suspicion that Gianna requested this stream because we are probably going to play a game of Panzer Leader to commemorate the 75th anniversary of Market Garden. And this is her way of kind of getting a little bit of a tutorial. So I said, that's cool. I will definitely do it because, I'll talk about Panzer Leader to anybody who'll listen. And this way, people learn the rules a little bit. Okay, so let's pretend it's the beginning of the American turn, and the Americans are trying to take. Let me zoom out a little bit. The Americans are trying to take that objective X, Hex 1617. All right, I don't like their chances. I don't think they have enough firepower, but let's pretend that they do. Let's also pretend that these guys. How do I want to do this? To where it's a useful tool to actually teach people. Okay, so we'll say that it's turn 5 right now. It's the beginning of the American turn 5. Previously, on the American turn 4, they pushed forward with some of these tanks and some of these tanks and some of these infantry guns. I'm sorry, some of these infantry. Okay, and that's important. Okay, so let's say that happened the last turn. Okay, and the reason that's important is these Germans are in woods. Whenever you're in a hex that has some woods graphic in it, more specifically, whenever you are adjacent to a green hex side. In Panzer Leader, there's no such thing as a green or a woods hex. There are green hex sides. So you'll notice that most of the trees are actually tree lines that follow hex sides. So hopefully my cursor is coming out on your monitors, and you'll see where it's always along a green hex side. So whenever you're adjacent to a green hex side, you're considered to be in the trees. So to zoom in to explain what I'm talking about here, this rifle company here, if he was in hex 1818, he is not adjacent to any green hex sides. None of these hex sides are covered in green tree graphics. So that's an open hex. Okay, but if he moves up into hex 1817, that has covered in green, that's covered in green, that's covered in green. He's in a cozy little, he's covered on 3 sides. He is definitely in woods. When you are in woods or in towns, you cannot be fired upon until you're spotted. You get spotted in one of 2 ways. You either fire out of that hex and somebody saw you, or enemy units move adjacent to you. That's why these airborne guys are adjacent to this rifle company. So we'll say that last turn, these guys charged up the hill. These guys could not take opportunity fire because they can't see through their own tree hex. And as they get into hex 1918, the airborne guys assaulted into that hex, and the assault didn't really work out. And we'll say that firefight was still in progress. So a little frustrating for the Americans last turn, let's say. We're just making this up as we go. But at least now, the Americans have that hex spotted. So we'll say that last turn they called in some artillery on that hex. Okay, so last turn they called in artillery on hex 1817. And their basic idea was, I'm going to call... Okay, so here's what happened last turn. Okay. The Americans knew, obviously there's no such thing as really hidden units in Panzer Leader. The Americans knew that there's a rifle platoon in 1817. How did they know? Because there's 3 counters right there on the hex grid. Okay, somebody saw something. There's 150 men in there. Somebody lit a cigarette. Okay, there's guys in that hex. This is not a game that tries to get super cheesy and super cagey. Oh, you have to pretend those guys aren't there. You have to pretend you don't know that. If you see the unit on the hex, you are not, you know it's there. period. Now, you may not be allowed to fire at it because you don't have a clear enough idea of where those 150 guys are within that 250-meter woods hex to call in mortars, artillery, tanks, who knows what on there. But you know they're there. The game doesn't get childish, okay? You know they're there. Somebody somewhere stepped on a twig. Somebody popped a beer can, okay? We all know there's somebody in there. Fine. So we'll say at the beginning of last turn, the Americans said, okay, I'm going to call in artillery on this hex. Okay? That's going to have huge penalties because I don't know who's in there or where they are in that hex, but I know somebody's in there. I'm going to call in artillery on that hex. Then they charge. Again, that's at the beginning of the turn. Plot indirect fire. They did that last turn. We'll say they resolved artillery somewhere, no problem. Air phase, blah 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 blah. They get down to the movement and close assault phase. So at the end of last turn, they said, okay, what's going on here? These guys were here. We know there's some people in there. We're going to have artillery coming in on them there. We don't have the artillery plotted because we don't have that unit spotted, that German unit spotted. We know they're there, but we don't really have a fix on them. So the artillery mission might drift and land on our own guys, but we're going to get crazy and we're going to take a big risk. Movement phase. You'll notice there's a 2 here for movement. These guys can move 2 hexes. 1, 2, close assault. We'll say they close assaulted and they didn't quite get the job done. Okay, that firefight is still in progress. Okay, that was the ending action on last turn. So now we're going to end up with the beginning of whatever turn this is. We'll say it's turn 5. The beginning of turn 5, here comes the American turn. Okay, the turn begins with plot new artillery. Plot new artillery. The Americans are calling in all their artillery on that hex. They know they have artillery coming in this hex, but again, it's not terribly accurate. The Germans were not well spotted when that artillery was first called in. They're going to close assault that hex again, but who knows? They might get it. They really want to get that hex. So they're going to call in artillery on that hex again. That's their artillery for last turn. Okay? I'm sorry, that's their artillery they're calling in for next turn. Okay, that's it for phase 1. Let me move this further up so we can reference it without me constantly having to scroll. Again, the secret sauce is the turn sequence. The turn sequence is your Bible. Know it, love it, learn it, know it. You go by the turn sequence. 90% of rules questions will be resolved just by reading the turn sequence. Plot indirect fire. We just did that. They're calling it in on that same woodland hex. Everybody got that? All right, let me check out the chat, make sure I'm not missing anything cool. Mokali. Oh, God. Good old Mokali. Oh, awesome. Yeah, Elisar, looks like Nova Simplar is going to be running your rescue terrorists on the Lufthansa, or not rescue the terrorists, rescue of Lufthansa Flight 181 game. Awesome. Yeah, definitely. Let's see how that works. I will be with you guys in spirits. Trust me, I'll be wanting to think about anything except what I'm going through at the moment. The hurricane is expected to arrive late Sunday, early Monday. I am not looking forward to that. Alright, so we resolve last turn's artillery. Here comes last turn's artillery. So last turn's artillery was called in on this hex. At the time, we did not have this hex well spotted, so there's a chance it could drift. So I'm going to turn on Mr. Webcam here. Hey, look at our new dice box. Alright, we're going to call in our new our artillery here. Okay, when you call in artillery and you don't have the hex spotted, or if your hex was spotted but you didn't have the units in there spotted and the units are under some kind of cover, or the unit that was calling in the fire mission gets killed or gets dispersed, or who knows what happens, you can the artillery has a chance of drifting. So there's a little chart in Panzer Leader which I can show you guys later, but it's a 1 or a 2. It lands right where it was supposed to. This is all on a d6. The whole game runs on 1d6. Let me go ahead and say that real fast. You never roll more than 1d6. It's a simple game, really. It's a simple game the way chess is a simple game. 10 minutes to learn, a lifetime to master. Alright, so like I said, It's a 1 or 2, it lands where it was supposed to. 3, 4, 5, it drifts 1 hex in a random direction. 6, it dissipates completely, and it just goes to the 4 winds, and it doesn't hurt anybody. So, let me see what happens here. Alright, 5, it's going to drift 1 hex. You roll a d6 to see what hex it drifts into. It's 1 hex in a random direction. You start at the top hex, straight to the north, and then just count clockwise. Please don't land on the actual airborne troops. 1. Okay, it did not land on the actual airborne troops. The artillery landed up here in hex 1816. The next artillery mission will be more accurate because now they are spotted. Remember, at the beginning of last turn, the board looked like this. These guys were not spotted yet because they didn't fire and nobody was adjacent to, no enemy units were adjacent to them. So that artillery mission was called in quote-unquote blind. This artillery mission was called in after that airborne company had moved up and engaged in combat. The Americans now know exactly where those Germans are. So this next artillery mission is going to be a lot more accurate. That's if they're still there. Okay. Now we have, that's it for indirect fire. It splashes up here and there's nobody up there, so it does no damage, obviously. Okay, now the Americans are going to do direct fire. The Americans are not going to fire with these infantry units because these infantry units are going to assault. So we are not going to do that. In fact, we're going to send them up some reinforcements. Well, no, let me stick to the turn sequence. Stick to the turn sequence. Let's get crazy. Let's send up some sacrificial Shermans up against these Panthers so these Panthers can't really escape. Again, they can move 8 hexes. Vehicles can move however many units or however many hexes they're hold on, let me reset that. I went too fast on that. So vehicles move why am I doing movement? I should be doing fire. Sorry. What did I just get done preaching about? Always stick to the turn sequence, right? What's the first thing I do? I break the turn sequence. The Americans don't really have any good. The reason I was kind of skipping is the Americans don't really have any good fields of fire. These Germans are all undercover. And the only ones I have spotted here are these infantry people. And these infantry people are infantry. And you know what? Maybe I'll put, for demonstration purposes, I'll put in some fire with these Shermans. So 11 plus 11 plus 11. Okay, here's how direct fire works, guys. This is the basic DNA of the game. Super fast. How you do it an actual direct fire attack. You add up the total number of direct fire points that you're trying to put into a hex. So say I want to fire all 3 of these Sherman platoons into this hex. I'm allowed to do that because I have line of sight, I am in range, and that enemy unit is under cover, but he is spotted. How is he spotted? There are friendly units adjacent to him. So they throw a smoke grenade in there and they say, hey, these assholes are in those woods. Go get them. So these tanks say, okay, I'm going to fire 33 total points. That's 11 times 3. Normally tanks have to divide against infantry because of armor-piercing guns, and we'll get into that later. But these are Shermans with dual-purpose ammunition. That's the little star next to the A. So they just stay the same. So it's 11 times 3 is 33. Great. How many enemies do I want to attack in that hex? There's a 6, there's an 8, and there's an 8. I'm looking at the defense value now. And the way it works, and this is 90% of Panzer Leader right here, you take your total number of attack points, you divide by the total number of defense points that you want to engage. Sometimes you get to engage only some of the hex, sometimes you have to overrun the whole hex. It depends on the kind of attack you're doing. But for direct fire, you get to pick and choose. You can shoot at only some of the enemy in a hex. Total number of attack divided by total number of defense, and that ratio that you get determines how strong your attack is. So there's a 1-to-1 attack, a 2-to-1 attack, a 3-to-1 attack, a 4-to-1 attack, which is good. You always want to attack on the 4-to-1 table if you can possibly help it. A 1-to-1 attack, you might pin him down. A 2-to-1 attack, you're certainly going to pin him down, or you're almost certainly going to pin him down. A 3-to-1 attack, you may kill him, and you're definitely going to pin him down. You may kill him. A 4-to-1, you are probably going to kill him. You're definitely going to pin him down. And a 7-to-1 attack, you are almost certainly going to kill him. And the table doesn't go any higher than 7-to-1. For Panzer Leader Purist, the 7-to-1 column comes from Hammer's Early Wars. So, we have 33 total points. How many German rifle platoons do I want to attack? I'm going to attack just one. And the reason being, he has an 8 in defense. 33, 311s, divided by 8 is 4-to-1. You always round in favor of the defender. Always round in favor of the defender. A 19 versus 10 is 1-to-1. You have to get to a full 20 to 10 to get 2-to-1. You know, a 199 to 100 would be 1-to-1. You have to have the full division in order to get the benefit of that next column. So fortunately I do have that, because 3 11s is 33 divided by 11. 3 11s times 3 is 33. Divided by 8 is 4-to-1 and change. So you always lose the change, in other words. So it's going to be one attack at 4-to-1. This is the CRT, Combat Results Table, or we sometimes call the kill chart. This is where everything dies. Okay? You find the ratio that you landed on. Again, the higher the better. And you cross-reference that with your die roll. Obviously, the low rolls are better in Panzer Leader. Most Avalon Hill games, low rolls are better. It makes the math easier to do. The high rolls are better on a D6 system, and Flames of War drives me absolutely crazy. It's like another whole math problem you have to do in every single die roll. It's the dumbest thing ever. I'm just used to low rolling games. So, my target number, never mind target number, here are the chances I have at the 4-to-1. A 1's a kill, a 2's a kill, a 3's a kill, a 4's a kill, a 5's a kill, a 6 is a dispersal. Obviously, I'm putting in a lot of firepower on a small unit. 4-to-1 attack is very strong. You always want to go for at least 4-to-1 if you can possibly help it, if you're trying to kill something. Okay, hopefully you guys don't hear too much of that fire and police sirens in the background. Apparently someone's having a worse night than me. Okay. Now, depending on the terrain or some other problems, the enemy might get a bonus to... the enemy might get to add 1 to your die roll. Those German infantry that we were looking at a second ago are in woods. So that gives them a +1 to the die roll. I have to add 1 to the die roll. Again, low rolls are always better, so a +1 is a bad thing. It's a bad thing because the Germans are in woods, and it's easier for the Germans to hide in woods against the incoming tank fire. So I'm on the 4-to-1 table, and I have to add 1 to my die roll. Okay, that is a 3. That gets read as a 4, because again, I have to add 1 to the die roll. I look at 4 on 4-to-1, and that is still a kill. An X is a kill. A D stands for dispersal. Again, that's pretty much a pin. And then there's what they call a special dispersal. That's the 2 Ds, or double D. The only thing a double D represents is if the unit was already pinned down or already dispersed and you get a double D result, that unit is now killed. That's the difference between a single and a double D. But if the unit was not already pinned, like this German rifle platoon was not already pinned, then there is no difference between a D and a double D. But it doesn't matter because we roll a modified 4, which is a kill. So that is 1 German rifle platoon out of gas. He's dead. That's going to make a huge difference when these airborne guys try to re-assault, because now they're only assaulting 14 defense points instead of what was in there before, which was 8 plus 8 is 16 plus 8 is plus 6 is 24. So they just lost, this German stack here just lost about a third of its combat power, and these paratroopers gave a mighty cheer, because they're going to have a little bit easier time on their second assault going into that hex. So this guy has now fired. These 3 tank platoons have now fired. We are now going. That's going to complete the American movement, American fire phase, because nothing else is really worth shooting. So now the Americans are going to start moving. One. Again, infantry units always move two, no matter what, because they can move through green hex sites. They can move up hills. They're infantry. They walk, no problem. Vehicles have a much higher movement rate. However, they have a few extra restrictions. They cannot drive through a green colored hex side ever, unless it's on a road. Let me rephrase that. The one exception is if they're on a road. There's no road here, so if this company of Shermans wants to move like that, he has to drive around the woods like that. So he has 8 movement points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He can do that easily. Now, the problem is he was in line of fire of these Panthers for a while. These Panthers may take an opportunity to fire a shot. If they wanted to, they would have to declare it now. They will not. This American platoon, or American Easy 8 company is going to come up a little bit. 1, 2. He's going to stay right there, actually. These pieces have absolutely no game value whatsoever. Hold on, everybody. Slight moment. Okay. These are just decorative / background / historical information. Okay. Okay, this company of Sherman's is going to go 1, 2. Notice he's now in this river. He's now in this gully. He can enter and travel down the gully however far he wants. To come out of the gully, though, he has to pay extra movement points to kind of barrel his tanks back out of that gully. Gullies and streams always have different rules depending on what kind of river your specific scenario is trying to represent. So we'll talk about that if we ever play a game like, live online, how the gullies work. Some Panzer Leader games say tanks can never enter a gully, period. You have to have engineers come in and lay a bridge. Some say that you can cross a stream with no problem. Some say you have to cross the stream, but you have to pay extra movement points to come out of it. There's all kinds of different rules. That's because there are no two streams exactly alike. Just check with your opponent and make sure that everyone agrees how gullies work. Gullies, streams, wadis, rivers, whatever you want to call them. Make sure that you and your opponent are in agreement before the scenario starts. So the way I usually play them is it takes 2 points to come out of them. Admittedly I play kind of easy with them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because again he was coming out of that gully. And he's going to go ahead and park there. 7, 8. They're getting up in these Panthers' faces because they're trying to kill these Panthers. The Panthers cannot move north or northwest because that would be going through these green hex sides. That means the Panthers are going to have to move directly next to the Shermans to try and get away. And that means that the Shermans are probably going to get opportunity fire on them as they do so. But we'll see what happens. That's if the Panthers don't stand and fight, which, spoilers, they're going to stand and fight. Okay, down here we have a little headquarters section of paratroopers. So we have one airborne platoon in there. We have a headquarters unit, and we have an 81mm mortar section. Okay, that 81mm mortar section is not really good in a cat attack. Notice its combat value, its crappy defense. It's literally like 20 guys with some 81mm mortar tubes. The headquarters platoon is even worse. That's like a couple officers and some radios. So this airborne platoon is going to detach from that headquarters company. If I can get it to do so. Come on, detach. There we go. And he's going to go 1, 2. He's going to try and catch up with the rest of the battalion, making this charge. Okay, the Americans could do no overrun attacks as they were making their moves. In order to do an overrun attack, you have to. Hey, Erasmus, what's going on? The storm, yeah, the storm. Here we go. Um, so you cannot do an overrun attack over any kind of terrain. By that I mean no streams, no towns, no woods. These panthers are currently in woods, so you cannot overrun them when they're in woods. Half tracks are in woods. You cannot overrun them when they're in woods. The Germans are really kind of hedgehogged in this little wooded ridge here, this little wooded hill. They're making the Americans dig them out. So that's why the Americans are doing no overruns here. In order to do an overrun, the enemy has to be in an open hex like this truck. Okay, it cannot be in a gully. It cannot be in a woods hex. It cannot be in a town hex. It has to be in an open hex, and you have to reach the enemy with 2 movement points left over. So if you have a movement of 9, like these Easy 8s do, you have to reach that truck in only 7 moves. That's because to overrun the hex, you have to have 2 units of speed left to abstractly, physically, enter the enemy hex, drive over them, back over them, run around, shoot machine guns, do all the stuff that happens during an overrun attack. But that's not happening here. Oops. Put that truck back where he was. Go away, Mr. Truck. What we're doing today, Rasmus, is we're not playing a game by any stretch of the imagination. We're just doing a bit of a tutorial how Panzer Leader works. Because we seem to be playing Panzer Leader more and more lately, and some people thought it would be a good idea to sort of teach the very basics of the game. Okay, so referring to our turn sequence, we've done direct fire. There were no pinned down American units, so there's no rallies to make. We've now done movement. The Germans have so far opted not to do opportunity fire. The Americans have no chances for overrun, so we're going to go ahead and do that close assault phase that always closes out the turn. Close assault phase is always the end of the turn. It's the very last thing that ever happens in a turn. Excuse me 1 second. So how do you do a close assault? Close assaults are fun. They can be bloody, but they're fun. Okay, so you add up all of your attacks. You add up all the enemy's defenses. You get the average, you get the usual odds ratio I mentioned before. And then the close attacking player always gets to subtract 2 from his die roll. If you have an engineer mixed in with in fact, let's go ahead and do that just for fun. Do I have an engineer? I know I do. I just have to find him. Let's replace this machine gun section. Sorry, Mr. Machine Gun Section, you're back here providing fire support with some combat engineers. Okay, and that was, by the way, the wrong unit. Damn it. So in a properly set up close assault, you would have these 2 machine gun sections in the back putting fire down on the combat hex. Okay, you also had some Shermans doing that as well. So you had tanks and machine guns, we'll say, putting fire into that hex. You either want to pin down or kill some of the units in that hex before you do your close assault. That's why close assault phase takes place in the turn sequence after your direct fire phase. Again, the secret is in the turn sequence. So now let's say that engineer section is in that close assault phase, or in that close assault stack. So now you have 2 platoons of paratroopers. That's 4 plus 4. That's some of the best infantry you'll see in World War II. Usually you see German rifles only have a 3 for attack. Most rifle platoons only have a 2 or even a 1. These Americans have 4 because they're paratroopers. Hence the little airborne symbol there on their unit counter. So we have a grand total of 9 versus the German defense of 14. 8 plus 6 is 14 versus 9. So, in the chat, what does that come to in odds? The Americans have 9 attacks, the Germans have 14 in defense. What do you say, chat? What does that come out to in odds? Who's been paying attention? There are your choices. Multiple choice test. Which one of these columns am I rolling on? Novus Templar, because science teacher 2-1. That is wrong. You would get slapped playing Panzer Leader doing that. No, in all seriousness, the American. There you go, 1-2. Trick question. That's also wrong. No, I'm just kidding. Except not really. Okay, so yes, the Americans have 9 attack versus the Germans have a 14 in defense. That does come out to a 1-2 attack. That is a poor attack because there's less attack going into that hex than there is defense waiting to meet it. So in most cases that would be true, 1-2. However, the difference here is, again, there's that engineer in that hex. Engineers always crank you up 1 column, and then you get to subtract the normal -2 from your die roll. So that 1-2 becomes a 1-1. You can see how powerful engineers are. That's satchel charges, Bangalore torpedoes, sometimes even flamethrowers, anti-tank mines, all the fun toys that combat engineers bring into a battle. They get, they got a great deal of help with that. Even if their unit is not terribly strong, they're carrying a lot of neat equipment. Excuse me. Okay, so we have 1-1. Subtract 2 from the die roll for cat attack. Add 1 to the die roll because the Germans are still in woods. The airborne paratroopers have to dig them out of those woods. So the net is 1-1. Subtract 1 from the die roll. Oops, that's the wrong key. Sorry, everybody. All right, 1-1. Subtract 1 from the die roll. That is a 3. That becomes a 2. That is the whole stack dispersed. One thing about a counterattack, you're not allowed to pick an individual unit within the stack. You have to hit the whole stack. You can't charge into that hex and attack only one guy. You have to attack both platoons. But that stack is now dispersed. What's the big deal? If the Germans fail to rally in a German turn, remember, that American artillery mission is coming in on that stack. The Americans were planning ahead. Now we're going to have American artillery 105s landing on dispersed Germans. That's bad. That's how Germans get killed. Units are insanely vulnerable when they're still pinned down. Even if they're not pinned down and they survive the artillery, then they get hit by tanks again. Then they get cat-attacked again, except this time there will be more American paratroopers in range. You see where this is going. Oops. Okay, but we did the close assault, and that was the end of the close assault. We now go to the German turn. We'll say the Germans don't really have any artillery, because a lot of times they didn't, at least late war, and the American Air Force and the British Air Force was taking care of that. The whole idea of German artillery. So, now we are looking at German direct fire phase. German direct fire phase. They have all kinds of Panthers and Mark IVs point blank. They are going to light up some American Shermans, unfortunately. Okay, so they could fire at these Shermans, they could fire at these Shermans, they could fire at these Shermans, which are much more dangerous. However, they are not very close, or they could fire at these Shermans. So the way it normally works is when tanks shoot against tanks, which is, the big fun part of the game, so to speak, which I don't really agree with. Infantry battles are a lot of times where the bread and butter of the game really winds up being. But at the end of the day, people like to shoot tanks and other tanks. So we have 10 Panthers, again, 2 platoons of 5, and 5 Mark IVs, 1 platoon of 5. 16 plus 16 plus 14. A-class weapons get to double against armored targets. A-class weapons stands for armor piercing. Armor piercing weapons double against armored targets. That's what they're made for. at ranges of 1 or 2. That's why these Panthers might not want to shoot at these EZ8s because they're 1, 2, 3 hexes away. So it would just be 16 and 16 and 14 against 10. That would be 4 to 1. That would probably kill one platoon of EZ8s. Or we could take that 46 and we can double it by shooting at targets that are much closer. Okay, so 16 plus 16 plus 14 times 2, if we shoot at targets that are all within 2 hexes, is going to come out to 92 points. How many Shermans do we want to engage? So 92 divided by, say I want to engage 3, divided by 27, that's 3 to 1. Or I can engage 2 platoons. What did I say? 92 divided by 18. That's a sloppy 4 to 1. Because there is no 5 to 1 column. Alright, so we'll say we're going to engage 2 platoons of Shermans at 4 to 1. And again, the math came out to 5 to 1 and change, but again, there is no 5 to 1 column. It goes 1 to 1, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, and then for some reason up to 7 to 1. So again, you always go in favor of the defender. So 5.1 to 1 becomes, long story short, take a shot, 4 to 1 odds against 2 Shermans. Or I should say 2 Sherman platoons. 4, that's an easy kill on 2 Sherman platoons. Oh no. I didn't make American red counters? Or I didn't bring them into this game? For shame. I'll have to fix that in a jiffy. Hold on. I'll fix that super fast. I can't believe I did that, guys. Sorry. You can't have a Panzer leader game without burning American red counters. I had all British red counters on here still. That ain't right. No, I don't want to change the picture. That's what you call graphic design on the fly, folks. Now, where the hell were we? This map is too big. We weren't even on that tab, stupid. That was embarrassing. Okay, so 2 of these Sherman platoons have been destroyed. I'll select 2 platoons, take them off. They're now destroyed, and they are replaced with a wreck counter. What is a wreck counter? A wreck counter represents 4 to 5 burning tanks in a hex. Okay, wreck counters obviously have no effect on combat. They don't block line of sight. They can't shoot at anybody. They're basically just burning down hulks. However, they do affect stacking. Only 3, again, in formal Panzer leader, where you're playing with 250 meter hexes, the rule is always going to be 4 units in a stack. One stack being in 1 hex, 4 units allowed per stack per hex. To fix a lot of these historical problems with the values on the counters without printing out all the counters all over again, we have just redesigned the game with 150 meter hexes that fixes all the ranges, all the preposterously blown out of proportion movement rates. We did have to increase all the movement rates on the infantry to 2, but that was a small fix compared to everything else. The reason for that long, boring diatribe is this is now considered a smaller hex. We only allow 3 units in a hex instead of 4. There are people out there that have boxed sets of Panzer Leader, and they're going to look that rule up and they're going to say, it says here I can put 4 units in a hex. That's the reason for the change. So these 3 German tanks, or these 3 German tank platoons have now fired. Both the Americans and the Germans do get something called split move and fire, which is every turreted AFV gets to move half of its distance during its movement phase, even if it's fired. Only turreted AFVs get that rule. So infantry platoons never get it. Towed artillery never gets it. Assault guns never gets it. Self-propelled howitzers never get it. That would go. That would be reviewed in the actual scenario, and only certain armies get it. The French in 1940 don't get it. The Arabs in 1956 and 67, 73 don't get it. The Soviets don't usually get it until you get to like 1944 scenarios. It's a thing. That's usually specified in the individual scenario. But for now, just to keep things simple, we're not having split movement fire for anybody. So that would end these three German platoons, their fire phase. What else is going to happen? Okay, so that's it for fire phase. Any movement. You know what? These half tracks don't want to die today. They're going to bug out. They're going to bug out 2 hexes. Fine, no problem. Okay, then we're going to continue our movement with these guys moving forward 1, 2. Actually, no, they're going to do this. They're going to move 1 hex. By the way, this is a really dumb move. They're going to move because now they're abandoning that objective hex. But again, we're just doing a demo here. Because they want to cat attack this tank while it's vulnerable before the Americans can get reinforcements in there. Oh, the Americans can't get reinforcements in there, and why? That hex is already maximum stacked. You're only allowed 3 units in a hex. These 2 rec counters count as units for stacking purposes. Dead tanks take up space. For the record, not every killed unit generates a rec counter. You'll notice when I removed this German rifle platoon, there was no rec counter up here. Okay, only destroyed armored fighting vehicles. Armored vehicles generate a rec counter. Trucks never generate a rec counter. Artillery pieces, any kind of infantry, headquarters units, whatever. You have to be some kind of a tank or at least a half track to generate a rec counter. So they're going to move down there. The Americans don't see that. This American unit does see that. He's the only American unit that can help. Okay, so when the Germans move, the Americans can take opportunity fire, assuming that their unit can see the enemy. He can see the enemy that did that movement. Not very, because there's so many woods here, not very many Americans could see that. He could see it because the enemy unit is now adjacent. No matter what the terrain is, once the enemy moves right next to you, you can see him. Normally, you can't see through. Oh, there is no green hex side there anyway. Okay, never mind. These guys can definitely see it. These guys can all see that. So now this American player has a tough choice to make. As these German units moved from this hex to that hex, clearly they want to assault this last platoon of Shermans. Do these Shermans fire in their own self-defense? Do these Shermans fire to try and help their friends? Do these airborne units fire to try and help those tanks? Don't answer yet, because everything that fires now is not going to get to fire in the next American fire phase. Remember, if you take opportunity fire, that's your turn. Nevertheless, I'm going to go ahead and shoot at least some of this stuff. I'm going to go ahead and shoot these 2 platoons and this company, this platoon of tanks. Am I that worried about cat attacking this stack of dispersed Germans again next turn? Not really. Again, they're already dispersed. 2, I know in the back of my head that I already have artillery missions coming in on the next turn. And number 3, I have this whole reinforced company with engineers that's going to close assault them again next turn. So, plus I can put these tanks on there. These tanks I'm not firing right now. I'm still going to have these tanks next turn. So again, you're always playing 3 turns. Last turn, this turn, and next turn. Kind of all at once. So again, we have 4 and 4. Range is 2, so they are in range. Again, that number up there is the range. That's a grand total of 8. Then they have 11 from this A that does not divide, because it's an A star. Becomes 19 points. 19 points against 10. We were just talking about this. 18. 8, 19. 4 plus 4 plus 11 is 19 versus 10. 1-to-1 odds. That sucks. We're not doing that. Instead, we're going to put our 8 plus 11 is 19 against an 8. At least that gives us a 2-to-1. That will be add 1 to the die roll. And if we can add 1 to the die roll, what we will do is maybe disperse them. Now, why am I doing all this? If I can't kill them on a 2-to-1, add 1 to the die roll. Well, notice the cat attack that's coming in. This is a game that absolutely defies you to think ahead. 3, 3, and 3 makes 9 versus what's the Sherman's defense factor? 9. That's 1-to-1 odds. He has engineers in here. So that means what? The column jacks up by 1. Boom, he goes to 2-to-1. He gets to subtract 2 from the die roll because he's doing a cat attack. This is an incredibly powerful attack. This is elite German infantry close assaulting American Shermans in the open. Those Shermans are in a lot of trouble. Okay? But if I can at least disperse or pin down, for lack of a better term, if I can at least disperse one platoon of these rifles, they don't get to participate in that close assault. Now we're looking at 6 versus 9. That just dropped down to 1-to-2. Now when those engineers kick in their bonus, they don't go from 1-to-1 to 2-to-1. They go from 1-to-2 to 1-to-1. We are enhancing the Sherman's chances of survival if we do this. But let's see if the dice have. Let's see if the dice agree with us. Again, we have 19. That's the Sherman plus the 2 airborne platoons firing long-range machine gun and rifle fire into those woods. We have to add 1 to this die roll. We're on the 2-to-1 table. 19 divided by 8. That's a 6. That's the worst roll in the game. 6 becomes a 7. Guess what didn't happen? This rifle platoon is not pinned. And that's terrible. That's very bad for this. So now these guys have fired, and it didn't do any good. So that was a gamble that failed. Now we have the original 9 versus 9, 1-to-1, because this is the German cat attack. 9 versus 9, 1-to-1, becomes 2-to-1, subtract 2 from the die roll. This is bad news. Unless the Germans roll another 6. 3, nope, that's a dead Sherman right there. We will check out the table in just a second to show you how I know that. But that German close assault totally succeeded and wiped out the rest of those Shermans. So we were on the 1-to-1 table with 9, 3 plus 3 plus 3 versus one American Sherman platoon with a defensive 9. That was the 1-to-1 table. Engineers included in the German stack jacks it up to 2-to-1. Subtract 2 from the die roll for close assaults. I rolled an unmodified 3. Subtract 2 from that roll. 1, 2. That's a 1. They killed that American Sherman platoon. That closes out the German turn. Again, close assaults always close out the German turn. The American turn 6, to use our example, would begin with them calling in artillery, probably on these guys that just blew up that Sherman platoon. Even though there are no American units adjacent to them and they are in woods, they did just attack somebody. Everybody saw that. Everybody saw that close assault happen, so they know these guys are considered spotted. Fair game. Hex 1718 is free. It's fair game to American artillery fire. So they would probably call in artillery on that hex. They would then resolve their artillery on this hex that they called in last turn, you'll recall. One thing I did forget to do was see if I could rally these Germans. So, units always rally automatically in straight-out vanilla Panzerleader. In Arab-Israeli wars, units have what they call morale. And morale is usually measured on a scale of A through D, A being the best, D being the worst. And that gives you a chance to rally. You never automatically rally. German rifle platoons, and especially with what I say, these are 116th Panzer Division. These guys are actually pretty good. We'll call them morale B. They are infantry, however, so they only rally on a 1, 2, or a 3. So rifle platoon does rally. Panzerschreck platoon does not rally. So we have partial success there. How much American artillery is coming in? Well, I didn't really set anything up here, but let's just say for sake of argument that there were 2 batteries of priests. That's pretty standard. Okay, so 2 batteries of priests, 13 and 13 becomes 26. They can fire from anywhere on the board, well, within 32 hexes, which might as well be anywhere on the board. They don't need line of sight. As long as somebody else has line of sight and they call in the correct hex one whole turn beforehand, they can hit any hex within their range, which again is 32. In fact, they have a minimum range. They can't fire within 1/4 of their movement unless they use direct fire, and then they can't fire through terrain and blah, blah, blah. We won't get into that. For now, let's just say that that attack goes in there. We have 30, what did I say, 26? 26 versus 8. 3 to 1, add 1 to the die roll. Again, 26 divided by 8 is 3 to 1 because you always lose the change. Always round in favor of the defender. 2 plus 1 because he is in the woods becomes a 3. I think that's still a kill on 3 to 1. And next, 26. Come on, get rid of that. Next, 26 versus 6 is 4 to 1. Add 1 to the die roll. Subtract 1 from the die roll because he's dispersed. And again, a double D will kill him. He's on the 4 to 1 table and adds nothing, and a double D will kill him. This is what's called an insta-kill or an automatic kill. You literally don't even need dice. Even if I'm on the 4 to 1 column, even if I roll a 6, I get a double D, which is enough to kill a unit that is already pinned down. He's already pinned down. Panzer Leader gets to the point where you can kill people without dice. That's your reward for good planning. Now, some people are going to look at what just happened and ask a couple questions. You'll notice that these two artillery units, when they fired, they got to apply their full firepower against each unit in the hex individually. So when tanks or infantry or whoever, whatever, attacks into a hex that have multiple enemy units, you have to take the total number of their defense factors for all the units that are in there. You take your total attack and you divide it, you get your ratio, and you roll on the CRT. Artillery, H in parentheses, or M's for mortars, are, for lack of a better term, saturation weapons. They have relatively low attack values, but they hit everything in the hex individually. So it's a bad idea to triple stack things in a hex when there's enemy artillery about. Okay, this is what happens when you're on a battlefield and the enemy has artillery, and you clump your guys together in these nice, dense, juicy artilleryman's dream targets with like 150 guys crammed within 150 meters. That's just an artillery's dream come true. Artilleryman's dream come true. When you're up against a lot of enemy artillery, 2 batteries of 105s isn't really a lot of artillery, but when you're up against a lot of enemy artillery, you wanted to get some tactical dispersion in your units. The rules, the corrected Arab-Israeli War rules, fix that. This old rule was tragically broken. This is one of the biggest fixes they made in Panzer Leader. So for those of you out there that might have a box of Panzer Leader in there, this is how Arab-Israeli War rules finally fixed that. This was a major, major problem. And that was that. Then who knows what the Americans would do? The Americans might fire their units that did not use opportunity fire. Well, one of them is burning. These 2 guys fired. Who knows what they might do? They might come up here. These tanks are all going to fire on these Panthers now that they finally revealed themselves. The position of those 2 Panthers cost 3 Sherman tank platoons their lives. There are 15 Sherman tanks burning just so we could find out where those Panthers were. You bet your ass these Shermans are all going to fire now. 33 times 2 is 66. Another 66. Again, these all double because they're within 2 hexes. So that's 33 plus another 33 in the second stack. That all doubles because they're all within 2 hexes. Plus those 314 with the easy 8s down in the southwest. Those don't double because they're not within 2 hexes, but they still are 14s. So a total of 174 points divided by the Germans' total defense factor of 24. That's 2 12s. It's 7 to 1 odds. Add 1 to the die roll. Just to end the stream with a bang. That's a 4. That becomes a 5 for the Sherman's Woods. I'm sorry, for the Panthers' Woods. That's not enough. They're very dead. So in reality, the Germans would not have hung around there. They would have fallen back. The Germans were very good at the timely retreat. They fire once, they knock out those Shermans, and then they use their split move and fire rule to get the hell out of there. But again, this was just a demo. Ask Damon sometime about how Panthers are in hedgerows. It's not fun. They fire at you, and then they use their split move and fire to get the hell out of there before you can hit them back. Then you have to find them all over again. That costs you another couple of tank platoons. You pin them down, they fire, they use split move and fire, they disappear again. You have to find them again. That costs you another couple tank platoons. Before you know it, just to find and fix and finally kill the Panthers, you've lost half a battalion of Shermans. Welcome to Normandy. Ask any veteran who was there. He'll tell you that's how it was. The game does get that right. It can be incredibly annoying for the Allied player. But then again, that's why the Allied player has airstrikes. Okay, guys, that was a super fast. Then the American movement phase. I'd say, oh yay, we're going to, take some objective axes. These Shermans all fired, so they're not going to move. These Americans are going to move, but they can't move through the German riflemen. Whatever. They're trying to get to that platoon. So you can see where the American, at the end of the American turn 6, where the American attack is starting to develop, they've taken one of the objective hexes and they're trying to get to the next objective hex. So, yeah, there you go. Super easy. All right, guys. You do know those 6s. Oh, man, that's right. Any bonus or negative for being in woods? Yes, you always get a +1 to your defense for being in woods. You are also not spotted in woods. You are completely invisible while you're in woods, so long as you have not fired or the enemy does not have a unit adjacent to you or you're not moving. If you're moving and you're in woods and the enemy has opportunity fire on you, he can take that shot because you're moving. As soon as you stop, you basically vanish. You take cover in the woods and all the enemy sees now is trees. So you do get a bonus for being in woods. Woods are actually very important in this game. They are an intense source of benefit and frustration for both sides. They conceal you. They really hinder vehicle movement. They can hide you. And whenever there's an attack into woods of any kind, there's almost always a +1 added to the die roll somewhere. That's artillery attacks, cat attacks, direct fire attacks. Add 1 to the die roll. H or M weapons. Okay, H or M weapons, we're talking about whether or not they affect every unit in the hex. Yes, usually. So I'm going to blow up these 2 counters. I'm going to blow up these 3 counters to illustrate what I'm talking about. Because we have some questions in the chat, and they are good questions. So like I said before, it's 4 numbers and a letter. The 4 numbers are the easy part. The one part of Panzer Leader that does, I will fully admit, I love this game, but I do admit sometimes it gets a little tricky in some places. The one part that gets a little tricky is this letter. There are many letters. I'll show you how many letters in just a second. But what I think what Rasmus is talking about is whether or not you can fire them indirectly. M's, you can fire indirectly. H's, you can fire indirectly if they are in parentheses. They affect everything in the hex equally and individually. So if you have 3 units in there that are worth, say, 6, that 13 is going to get 3 2-to-1s. 13 divided by 6, 13 divided by 6, 13 divided by 6. Whereas this H, with no parentheses, is just bolted into a tank. It fires straight forward. That's old school Napoleonic direct fire howitzers. Okay, over open sights, straight at the enemy. Cannot fire indirectly, but it also has all these other bonuses, which we'll get into later. But it has to affect everything in the unit, in the hex, like a normal attack. So if you had, what did I say before? Let's say you were fighting on this German stack over here. At 14, I would have to say, oh, do I want to attack that 8? That's 14 divided by 8. That's only 1-to-1. Oh, I want to attack 2. That's 14 versus 8 plus 8 is 16. That's 1-to-2. It gets very, very diluted. H classes get to double at certain things, and I'll get into that in a second. But this is basically a much more conventional weapon. This is old school. You roll up on the enemy, you point, and you shoot. This bombards the entire hex. It usually has a lower value. I mean, look at these poor 81 millimeter mortars. They only have a 3. But they affect everything in the hex, and they affect it individually. So when you're up against a lot of indirect fire saturation weapons, M's and H's in parentheses, the last thing you want to do usually is to crush a bunch of units together in one hex. That makes for a delicious artillery target. Because again, he gets to put his attack factor against everything in the hex individually. As opposed to these guys, or A's or I's or any other kind of weapon that only get to put in targets, that only get to put in their attack against each target and divide as normal. Like we were talking about pretty much all stream. So there are many different versions of this. This is my version that tries to pull together everything from 1939 to 1991. This is the weapons effectiveness chart. This is, like I said, this is where you get all the letters. And this is the one part of Panzer Leader that gets a little weird. Before anyone freaks, this is, again, everything between 1939 and 1991 so far. I'm going to get into the 21st century pretty soon with Panzer Leader. But this is everything within like 80 years of armored combat. So you will never use this whole chart. This chart has laser-guided bombs. There weren't a lot of laser-guided bombs in Normandy. Air-to-air missiles. There weren't a lot of air-to-air missiles in Normandy. SAMs, guided missiles. You know, there's a lot of stuff in here that you won't have to worry about in any particular game. But this is the chart that describes how the different types of guns, again, that's the letter in the center of the counter, the different type of gun affects different kinds of targets under different circumstances. And it's pretty much either it gets doubled, it's a normal attack, it's a half attack, or it's not allowed. And then there are little footnotes in here, mostly having to do with different errors. So again, this is a lot more complicated than it looks. In any single scenario, you're using about 1/4 of this chart at the most, more like 1/10. But again, this chart is supposed to be like the Rosetta Stone for the entire game family, so to speak. Pretty much I took the weapons effectiveness charts from Panzer Blitz, Panzer Leader, Abrams Really Wars, and Tactical Combat Middle East, and I smashed it all into one unified kind of a Rosetta Stone here. That even now I'm still tweaking in very small places. But really, once you get the CRT down, and however much of the WEC, or the weapons effectiveness chart, that you have to deal with, most of it you memorize after 1 or 2 turns. I know it looks very complicated. It really isn't. This chart is like over-explaining things. But that's because these games rely upon and benefit from absolute clarity. So the book of Arab Israeli Wars is thick. The book for Panzer Leader is pretty thick. The weapons effectiveness chart looks like a nightmare. It looks like an accountant's wet dream. It's over-explaining, and it's making sure that there is never a 4+ in these kinds of games. The first time I logged into On Tabletop, or back then it was Beasts of War, I logged into Beasts of War and they started talking about 4-ups. I couldn't believe my ears. I was like, what the hell kind of games do you guys play? That is an absolute anthema in our kind of gaming. You do not have a 4+, because absolutely everything is covered in what looks like a big chunky rule book and a big chunky chart. That's why we have big chunky charts, because we don't like 4-ups. Because it's an inconsistent way to game. Exploding trees and so on to create extra shrapnel. This, I know what you're talking about. You're talking about secondary shrapnel. And you're talking about tree bursts and air bursts. That rule does come up in Valor and Victory. This game does not have that. But I do know what you're talking about. Why they chose not to work that kind of mechanic into this game, I'm not 100% sure. I would guess, Rasmus, that most of the reason for that would be simply in Panzer Leader, it's less about what you can kill because all the guns kill, all the guns hit. It's what you can see. And woods give you partial concealment. As far as physical protection, who cares? But buildings and towns and trees and sometimes gullies, they give you a defense bonus not because they magically stop enemy bullets, but because they just keep you somewhat hidden and they make you tougher to spot. Again, every counter in this game is a platoon of up to 50 men, and every hex is anywhere between 150 and 250 meters. So who knows where in that hex these two platoons of rifles really are. They could be anywhere in that hex. Because they're in woods, they get to hide a little bit, and that's what gives them +1. Yeah, Brass was absolutely correct. It's mostly the scale. Now, when you go down, when you click down one level in scale, so to speak, down into Panzer Leader, I'm sorry, down into Valor and Victory, you're talking about squad level games. And there, the hexes are only 20 meters across, and you have maybe 30 men in a 20-meter hex. That's a lot smaller. It's a lot less about hiding and a lot more about the airbursts that you're talking about in the trees. Valor and Victory totally has the airburst rule for certain kinds of weapons, mainly mortars against infantry units in trees. You get a -1 to your roll, but whatever your roll winds up being, that doubles. So it's a weird kind of a formula there. You're more likely to miss, but whatever does hit is going to do double damage. Is probably a better way to put that. Okay, guys. So we've been streaming now for about 2 hours. That's a little longer than I thought I was going to stream. I got my little Panther here in honor of Panzer Leader. Again, I'm pretty sure this is like 1 to 35 scale. This is a tank platoon that you very often see in Panzer Leader, especially 1944-45 scenarios, which in classic Panzer Leader is most of the scenarios. Classic Panzer Leader, like we see here in the actual old 1974 box set, these scenarios run from D-Day to like Varsity, March 1945. It's a pretty brief window in time. It's not even a full year. For all the attention that part of the war gets, it's actually very brief when you think about it. Less than 1 year out of 6, depending on how you look at World War II. Some people say World War II lasted 8 years, but that's another whole discussion. So that's Panzer Leader. Again, I know I blew through it super fast. We didn't really do a whole heck of a lot. Those of you who have played the game probably know that it's a lot more intuitive than I probably made it sound right here. There are a lot of rules. The good news is most of the rules are not required for any particular given scenario. So if you have somebody who's good at teaching it and somebody who doesn't mind running it for you and walking you through some of these scenarios, what the game allows you to do is say, okay, here's a scenario with certain kind of units. You play that, you have fun. Now you've learned your next scenario maybe brings in a little bit of mortars. Your next scenario brings in a little bit of off-board artillery. Then you have aircraft. Then you have offshore bombardments. Before you know it, you're playing with the whole thing. Airdrops, glider assaults, parachute drops, partisans, guided missiles in Arab-Israeli wars, close infantry assaults, helicopter assaults, again in Arab-Israeli wars, anti-aircraft fire attacks, bombing missions, fighter bombing missions, interdiction artillery missions, counter battery fire missions, saturation artillery missions, close assaults, engineer close assaults, overruns, direct fire assaults of like 4 or 5 different types of direct fire weapons, machine guns, or infantry class weapons, H class weapons, M class weapons, A class weapons. There's a lot to it, and it does sound like a lot, and it is a lot. I'm not going to lie to you. It's not a game that is easy to get your head around all at once, but with judicious design of scenarios, you can kind of staircase your way into it, and before you know it, you'll be playing like a champ. So we've had a couple players give this an honest try here on SitRep and on tabletop.com with mixed results. Everyone who's tried it has enjoyed it. Some people have found it a little tougher than others, but they've tried more difficult scenarios and more difficult armies than other people have. So far, we've had Damon, who's tried it and had a good time with some Arab-Israeli war stuff and also some British in World War II. Bruce Lee has tried it with the British in the desert, Tunisia, 1943. The Soviets in the February of 43, and again Gold Beach with the British in 44. We've had Yavasa try it a couple times with Poland. He's had 3 games now. He's won 2. Yavasa has definitely picked this game up fast. Bruce Lee's got a handle on it for sure. Damon had a tough time with it, but it's not Damon's fault. Damon had a rough time because he wanted to play Arab Israeli Wars, full Arab Israeli Wars, and he wanted to play the Israelis. And it sounds like they would be the easier faction. They're not the easier faction. Like a lot of good games, playing the very highly trained, very technologically superior, qualitatively much better force is usually a lot harder because there's a lot less forgiving. You make one mistake and you lose one tank platoon. That was half your force, Mr. Israeli Commander. Here come the Egyptians with another 10 battalions. Whereas, the Egyptians or the Syrians in those examples might be a little more forgiving to try to learn on because you can lose half your force and you have half left. You keep on trucking. But I warned him ahead of time, but he said, you know what, I'm jumping in the deep end of the pool. I'm cool. And he finally did start winning some average relay war games. Again, those are not easy games to start off with. And then I was talking earlier about the photographic evidence of how rewarding Panzer Leader could be. If you guys ever get a chance, here's your homework assignment. If you ever get a chance, check out part 3 of the Gold Beach game on SitRep YouTube channel. Find the Gold Beach 3 Panzer Leader games. There's 3 videos. Look at part 3, and you get to about the middle part of part 3 when you get to, it was a 9.5-hour game. I'm not kidding about that. We recorded almost all of it. Of course, the videos on YouTube are only like half an hour each, and there's only 3 of them, so we edited it way down. But after a 9-hour game, he got that one roll that finally gave him and Bruce Lee both, him and Andrew, victory. And the webcam happened to be turned on at that moment. And you can see that smile on his face. I'm actually not kidding. I don't want to embarrass him if he sees this later. That made me feel 10 feet tall as a designer. Because it was like, that guy just got it. This is why we play Panzer Leader. This is why we put ourselves through this torture. Rolling forward, we have also had Damon, who's been probably the bravest person in Panzer Leader. Damon tried 1991 Gulf War along with Rasmus, who I think is still on the stream. Here we go. The madman disses Leroy Jenkins into the middle of an Israeli force. So he took his M1 Abrams platoon and charged into the middle of 3 battalions of Iraqi tanks. So he had his 14 M1s, and he drove smack into the middle of 1, 2, 3, like a perfect triangle of 60 enemy tanks. No, 90 enemy tanks. 3 full battalions. 3 times 30 is 90. That was a lot of fun. He shot his way out of it, so good on Rasmus. He did pull that one off. But that was one of the biggest Leroy Jenkins moves I've ever seen in Panzer Leader. That was great. That was a lot of fun, if nothing else. It's amazing he got away with it, but he did get away with it. All full fair play, absolutely. All right, guys. So again, that's the general basics of Panzer Leader. I stress general basics. If my suspicion is correct, and we were doing this to kind of help get Gianna teed up, who has played these kind of games before. First of all, Gianna's a big fan of Advanced Squad Leader back in the day. That was another Avalon Hill game that was even a lot more complicated by at least an order of magnitude than Panzer Leader. So if she used to play Advanced Squad Leader, she'll have Panzer Leader down in no time. That'll be no problem at all. But if I'm correct, and again, this is completely unconfirmed, that we wanted to look at Panzer Leader here in a tutorial basis because we were thinking about a possible Market Garden themed game in the middle of September, which will mark the 75th anniversary of Market Garden. we may be, in fact, primed up, ready to run that. That's the reason I put in some airborne platoons. What we would see instead in this game is a bunch of American 82nd Airborne at places like Nijmegen and the Val River. And what you will see instead of American tanks are British tanks of 30 Corps, specifically the Irish Guards. So we may have three colors on the board there. We'll have British tanks, American Green Airborne troops with all their support weapons and support units, because they had been on the ground a couple of days by that point, and of course plenty of German Black. Actually, we'll have two Germans. We'll have German Gray and German Black for SS, because a lot of those German units were also SS. So that will be a colorful board, if nothing else. Again, that's pending other commitments with SitRep Podcast. That's pending how long it takes me to rejoin the 21st century after Hurricane Dorian has its way with us. When we're going to get our power grid back, and who knows what's going on. We don't know which way that storm's going to turn. We're hoping it turns to the north. Nothing against our friends in northern Florida and Jacksonville and southern Georgia, but we're not keen to get clobbered by another Category 4. The memories of Hurricane Irma are still pretty fresh, and we're not looking forward to another one. But we'll see what happens. We'll know a lot more tomorrow afternoon, which way that storm's going to go. Yeah, we'll see what happens. You know what? Not to get too gamey about it, but almost no matter which way the storm goes or how soon, but we know it's going to turn north. It's when it turns north is what's really going to make the difference for us where we are in this particular stretch of Florida. But the good news is, this is maybe just me being foolishly optimistic, is we're on the left side of the storm, no matter what. And that's always a good thing. If you have to get hit by a hurricane, be on the left side. The wind speed actually changes. The wind is coming off the land instead of off the sea. Storm surge is a lot less. The tornadoes get thrown off of the right side of the storm, not the left side of the storm, because of the way they spin. They always spin a certain way. So if you have to get hit by a hurricane, get hit on its left side, not on its right side. So we get a +1 to our rolls. let's put it that way, and we'll see what happens. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and close out the stream. If anyone has any questions on how to play with Panzer Leader, if anyone has there's a couple guys out there that I know have box sets of this game because I sent them to you. Let me know, and we can talk about it. Either put the comment here or in the YouTube stream or wherever, and I'll get in touch. And we'll see you on the other side of the storm. And best luck of everybody going into next week. Have a great weekend, everybody. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close down the stream. Talk to everybody soon.